We ask why and how this issue ended up becoming a social problem in the Philippine context. In this situation, every Filipino citizen, specifically the taxpayers, are required to pay taxes and in the end fund these politicians. Since there's a lack of transparency on the distribution of taxes, we originally assumed that the taxes paid go to funding projects that can supposedly help the community and citizens, especially during natural disasters. But we find out that our money becomes a factor to why politicians continue to stay on power, as funds are used for their own personal benefit and in the end corruption. Example of recent corruption issues include DPWH's projects, budget cuts, and duplicated fundings when it comes to flood control. It comes to the point where Filipinos gather through protests to voice out their disappointment over corruption. In line with this corruption issue, there are also natural disasters that occur in the Philippines. Given we are a tropical country, building a stronger barrier and infrastructure that can protect the citizens from being affected and reducing disasters can benefit us. Instead, we go through major pushbacks on projects that can supposedly benefit us due to the argument that many of these funds are being selfishly used. Without properly addressing and fixing the issue, many lives outside are heavily affected. While there's an ongoing natural disaster, communities and their properties are heavily destroyed, leaving them physically and mentally affected, and it does not affect the development of the Philippines in the social aspect, as everyone goes through the experience of getting negatively affected due to the decisions made by the government.
Corruption in the Philippines has a long history, and its impact on urban planning and disaster management is very clear. In 2024, Undersecretary Reynaldo controlled billions in funds for infrastructure projects, including flood control, with a significant portion diverted through personal channels, according to sworn affidavits. For many Filipinos, this feels like deja vu. The Marcos couple amassed wealth during their rule from 1965 to 1986, and efforts to recover those assets or hold them accountable largely failed. In 2001, former President Estrada was charged with plunder. His 2007 conviction revealed a network of officials profiting alongside him, yet he was pardoned shortly after. Subsequent scandals, from fertilizer fund overpricing in 2006, North Rail overpricing in 2008, military kickbacks in 2011, other scandals, from fertilizer fund overpricing in 2006, North Rail overpricing in 2008, military kickbacks in 2011, the pork barrel scandal in 2014, the PhilHealth and Farmally issues in 2019 to 2020 follow the same cycle. It starts with media attention, then investigations, then court cases, and often acquittals. Politicians often survive scandals and maintain power, while their networks continue to influence government. This corruption has consequences for disaster risk reduction and urban planning. Projects are delayed, mismanaged, or underfunded, leaving communities exposed to floods, typhoons, and earthquakes. Filipino resilience, also known as our ability to recover and adapt, is often relied on to make up for these systemic failures. While admirable, this resilience can be used to justify neglect and weak governance. Understanding this historical pattern shows that protecting communities requires transparency, accountability, and planning before disasters strike, and not just hope that people will bounce back. The impact of corruption on urban planning and disaster management in the Philippines is experienced very differently depending on who you ask. For those benefiting from the current system, the DPWH contractors, engineers, construction company owners, and the politicians involved, these projects are a source of profit and influence. Mismanaged funds, overpricing, and delayed projects are opportunities for personal gain, and scandals rarely stop their careers. In fact, some even maintain or expand their power, despite repeated allegations of wrongdoing. Ordinary Filipinos, on the other hand, face the consequences of the system every day. When typhoons flood communities or earthquakes damage infrastructure, it is the citizens who suffer. Homes are destroyed, lives disrupted, and recovery is often slow because disaster management plans were poorly funded or poorly executed. The very structures meant to protect people fail, and citizens are left relying on their own resilience to survive and rebuild. This difference in perspective highlights a stark inequality. What is a source of wealth and opportunity for some is a source of risk and loss for others. Understanding how each group views the problem helps explain why reforms are difficult to enforce. For the system to change, accountability must reach those in power, not just rely on the endurance of the people who have always borne the brunt of these disasters.
Moving forward to the power analysis of our capstone, how power and corruption shape the country and how it makes us more vulnerable to disasters. First of all, disasters are not just the cause of natural hazards, but it can also be the result of poor governance and abuse of power. Politicians who have the authority and hold all of the budget allocations, decision-making, and approving of projects, or who are in charge of the process where each allows the public fund to be given directly to each contractor, are connected and tied with those who gain more. In addition, a lot of private companies benefit from an unjust and corrupt system since they will be able to profit from that said projects, making it overpriced, incomplete, or even a ghost one, or substandard, altering the rules for their gain. Power imbalances in disaster risk reduction and urban planning will hit hardest and affect those with least influence, or the poorest and marginalized communities suffer most. The structures built fails, as shown by the 2025 COE report finding 727 flood control projects are unstable or unidle. Vulnerable groups, including women, elderly, children, and people with disabilities, face a greater risk because of inadequate evacuation centers, whereas F/7 outlined DRRM personnel struggle with limited funds, materials, and resources because of mismanagement, according to Greenpeace Philippines 2025. Moreover, power is exercised through reinforcement of inequality and other loopholes that people adjust for each circumstance to fall under their liking or to benefit and aid their personal gain. Most contractors use their connections and influences to withhold access on budget control and projects to showcase a facade. They are the ones that's supposed to make a country better with access that they have, yet they purposely hide information because of questionable actions. In other cases, whistleblowers are silenced out of fear. Despite all the obstacles and challenges that may occur, it can be an opportunity for us to fight for our right and make a change. Through transparency, such as monitored systems, opening of procurement platforms can help lessen information monopolies and achieve effective governance. Likewise, collaborating with ethical professionals with holding power, NGOs can foster accountability, reliability, and public regulation. Importantly, we should empower everyone to participate in DRRM education and planning to reduce and overpower most corrupt officials in the Philippines. To finally end, reducing disaster risk means challenging those who have power and changing the system that puts people in danger.
Poor DRRM in the Philippines is multifactorial. At the base, our country is already a disaster-prone nation due to its unique geography. Geographic fragmentation, tectonic instability, and extreme weather events have put the Philippines at the top of the World Risk Index 2025 as the most disaster-prone country. Over the past decade, our country has been hit by earthquakes, droughts, and typhoons that are progressively intensified by climate change. Such vulnerabilities are compounded by rapid and unmanaged urbanization and building of homes in high-risk areas due to the lack of affordable housing for many low-income urban Filipinos. Coupled with persistent corruption in the country, where personal interests of primary decision-makers shift their priorities to crooked methods, stalling the implementation of effective disaster risk reduction and climate policies, and preventing resilient infrastructure development, the Philippines is subject to weak disaster preparedness, management, and response. All these are made evident by the successive typhoons experienced by the country in the latter half of 2025, especially Typhoons Nino and Duan that brought massive wide-scale devastation and head-deep flash floods to areas they have struck, into places that are usually flood-free. The aftermath of a disaster often leaves our nation suffering from costly economic damages in agriculture, livelihood, private properties, and public infrastructure. These damages disproportionately impact the poor as they are less equipped to withstand or bounce back from climate-related disasters. They suffer extensive displacement, with limited resources, education, employment skills, and financial assistance for recovery, and the recurrence of these disasters often leaves them trapped in a cruel cycle of poverty, as all their assets and home get completely wiped out every time. Crops get flooded and farmers are forced to sell their yield at unreasonably low prices. Roads, schools, and public facilities are also destroyed. Meanwhile, corrupt government officials and private contractors of ghost or substandard flood relief projects continue to plunder taxpayer money. To disguise alone, the contractor family, at the eye of this issue, have collectively amassed 31.6 billion pesos in flood control contracts from 2022 to 2025. Zaldico, former Yapjoco representative, is alleged to have gotten kickbacks from his billion peso insertions! Meanwhile, corrupt government officials and private contractors of ghost or substandard flood relief projects continue to plunder taxpayer money. The disguise alone, the contractor family at the eye of this issue have collectively amassed 31.6 billion pesos in flood control contracts from 2022 to 2025. Zaldico, former Yapjoco representative, is alleged to have gotten kickbacks from his billion peso insertions in the national budget that then funded these anomalous flood control projects. Yet until now, nobody is being held accountable for these crimes, while ordinary Filipinos clamor for accountability and change and continue to bear the brunt of the disaster's ruin. Addressing poor DRRM and urban planning requires a massive shift from reactive response to proactive risk management. To combat this social problem, we propose a two-part scheme where the government is most integral to its success. The first part involves transformative reforms, investments, and other interventions, and the second part focuses on transparency and accountability to ensure that these interventions are properly implemented. For the first half, we urge the Philippine government to fund tools and agencies crucial to understanding disaster risk, strengthen disaster management reforms, invest on disaster-resilient infrastructure, provide robust support and aid for recovery, and regulate destructive projects that exacerbate the effects of climate change. First, being well-informed on disaster risk helps in our preparedness. Technological tools, simulations, and mapping can track risks and hazards. The technical expertise of agencies like PVOLCS, Pag-asa, NAMRIA, Mines and Geosciences Bureau, and UP Resilience Institute complements one another in multi-hazard risk assessments. Sufficient funding of these tools and agencies ensure the accuracy and precision of their assessments and the efficiency of public information dissemination. Next, our country has progressively expanded its DRRM laws, culminating in the DRRM Act of 2010 that established a national framework. But more needs to be done. Multi-level DRRM implementation streamlines risk management from the national down to smaller structures such as the local government and barangay. To achieve this, forefront involvement of LGUs in DRRM and strengthening of local DRRM councils are to be supported by government checklists and training with community partners. Third, being a disaster-prone country, building resilient infrastructure that withstand the impact of intensified natural hazards aids survivability and rehabilitation for those directly affected. Hence, proper management and allocation of funds for resilience building must be ensured to overcome budget constraints. Fourth, with all the previous management and preparedness strategies in place, the onset of disasters still brings about destruction to the affected. Robust support, especially for the poor and highly vulnerable, is crucial in getting Filipinos back on their feet. Reconstruction of education and health infrastructures, housing, social services, livelihoods, employment, and resettlement all help in long-term recovery and rehabilitation. Lastly, since climate change intensifies natural disasters, there is a need for enhanced regulation of activities like mining, deforestation, flattening of mountains, destructive fishing, rapid urbanization, and other destructive projects that accelerate environmental degradation. Now, for the second half, we urge the Philippine government to be transparent and accountable for the corruption that persists, enacting laws that ensure transparency, strengthening audit mechanisms and whistleblower protection, partnering with credible professionals and sectors unrelated to government officials, and employing project tracking and monitoring methods accessible to the public are all recommended. Because all undertakings mentioned in the first half can only be effectively implemented by a stronger, honest, and humane government composed of capable and empathetic leaders who are one with the people.
We've been working on this project, we just can't finish it because we had too many deadlines that we had to submit. But now we can literally finish this project that made us reflect on results more deeply than we expected. At first, we thought corruption in disaster management was just another topic we all hear, but then something far away from our everyday life happened. As we went through all these reports, COA findings and stories of wasted flood control funds, something shifted in us. We started seeing how much these issues shapes the kind of country we live in, and how these problems quietly affects families like us and people we've never even met. For this, whenever disaster happened, we honestly used to think, well, Philippines is resilience. Well, that's just how the Philippines is. We're a disaster-prone country, we're used to this. But then, reading COA found 747 tidal or unusable DPWH project in 2024, and that is 6.4 billion pesos was lost to defective flood control work, made us pause. It felt unfair. Well, it's literally unfair. The PRIF log's explanation of how climate funds are being plundered made us see how dangerous it is when people like us become too numb to demand accountability. Learning about this guy's 31.6 billion flood control contracts and the kickbacks schemes like linked to political allies made these issues like a school topic and more like pattern of being pretty injustice that affects every Filipino life. At the same time, reflecting on this topic made us acknowledge our own privilege. Report like the World Risk Index 2021 and the World Bank Disaster Preparedness Assessment reminded us that while the Philippines is the most disaster-prone country in the world, not everyone experiences disaster equally. Families living in a highly zoned informal sectors, farmers, women, children, and persons with disability carry the heaviest burden whenever corruption leads to failed structure or ghost project. Meanwhile, those in power, like the contractor, politicians, and officials who gain from these schemes rarely feel the consequences of their actions. Doing this project made us understand that it's easy for us to watch the news safely from home, but for others, this floods and landslide mean losing everything. This personal realization shaped our mindset. It made us more critical and more compassionate. It reminded us that studying corruption isn't just about analyzing numbers or scandals. It's more about recognizing how governance, inequality, and human lives are interconnected and understanding our own role in questioning, caring, and not accepting things just because they have always been that way.